Good evening. My name is Janine Kuhn-Coker, and I am president of the League of Women Voters of Salt Lake. I want to welcome you to Coming Together on Police Reform. How will the legislature make a difference? This is the third in the four-part series of virtual panel discussions, the purpose of which is to facilitate informed civil discourse that will drive and sustain meaningful police reform. The sponsors for this event are League of Women Voters Salt Lake, Better Utah Institute, ACLU Utah, NAACP Salt Lake Branch, Utah Black Roundtable, and Journey of Hope. A recording of tonight's events will be made available to the public by our sponsoring organizations through our website and social media. Other recordings of this event, whether they be in person or of a computer screen, may not be used without express written approval from the League. The League will only allow audio-video of this event to broadcast in its entirety, except by the media reporting on the event. Our discussion tonight focuses on the 2021 legislative session and how lawmakers can best answer citizens' demand for police reform. And now to introduce our esteemed moderator. Jason Groth is a smart justice attorney at the ACLU of Utah, where he works on ending mass incarceration and racial disparities in Utah's criminal legal system through litigation, policy work, and advocacy. Prior to joining the ACLU, he attended the University of Iowa College of Law, where he earned the Willard L. Boyd Public Service Distinction with highest honors. And after graduation, he worked as a public defender in Colorado, representing adult and juvenile clients in misdemeanor and felony cases in trial and on appeal. Please welcome Jason Groth.
Thanks, Janine. I know it's always a little bit awkward since we can't actually do an applause, but appreciate the virtual applause if there is any. So yeah, thank you for everybody being here this evening. And we're just gonna go over some initial housekeeping. So kind of structure the discussion tonight. We're gonna have three different topics. And the third topic is actually gonna be the audience members asking their own questions. But the first one's going to be responding to the voices of the people, kind of how the nuts and bolts of how legislators interact with the community and how those ideas in the community become bills and then laws. Then the second topic is going to be specific to police reform bills for 2021 in the upcoming session, which is really, I guess, just a week away. So that's coming up very quickly. And then, as I said, the third part is going to be audience questions. So a lot of us may have questions ready to go at the moment. Just have those ready to be typed into our Q&A chat function. So at the bottom of your Zoom screen, on the right-hand corner, it looks like Q&A. You can just type in your questions there, and then we'll get to those during that last segment. So next, let's go ahead and introduce the panelists here. This is who everybody's here to see. So first off, Molly Davis is a policy analyst specializing in criminal justice at Libertas Institute. She's also a senior contributor for Young Voices Advocates, working to expose the public to policy reforms that impact everyday Americans. You can find her work on various local and national news outlets, including Washington Times, Wired Magazine, Orange County Register, and her local Salt Lake Tribune. She's a Michigan native who attended Rocky Mountain College in Montana, graduating magna cum laude with a BA in political science and communication studies before venturing to Utah for her love of the outdoors. Next, we have Senator Janie Iwamoto. She was elected to the Utah State Senate in 2014. She serves in leadership as the Minority Caucus Whip. She previously served on the Salt Lake County Council, where she became the first Asian American woman elected in the state of Utah. Janie graduated magna cum laude in mass communications from the University of Utah and went to receive her JD from the UC Davis School of Law. Senator Iwamoto serves on nearly 24 committees, including the Executive Appropriations Committee, Legislative Management, Senate Rules, Ethics, and the Health and Human Services Standing Committee. She also serves on the Native American Legislative Liaison Committee, which seeks to address concerns affecting Utah Native American tribes. She is passionate about criminal and social justice issues, campus safety, and environmental quality. Senator Iwamoto is a proud member of the League of Women Voters. Next is Carl Moore, who is a founding member and chairperson of PANDOS, Peaceful Advocates for Native Dialogue and Organizing Support, and co-founder and vice chair of SLC Air Protectors. Carl's father is Hopi, and his mother is English, Irish, German, Mexican, and Chemehuevi. He's a member of the Colorado River Indian tribes in Arizona. He is concerned about humanity as a whole and has used his platform of being a cultural lecturer and performer to dispel unfair stereotypes of natives, to give all people an assurance of their value, and to bring his creator glory. Carl has 7 children and a granddaughter. He majored in political science and minored in American Indian Studies at Utah Valley University. And last but not least is Representative Eric Hutchings. He served in the Utah legislature from 2001 to 2021. He has held the positions of Speaker Pro Tem in the House of Representatives, Chair of the Executive Office Criminal Justice Sub-Appropriations Committee, and the Judiciary Committee. He also served in the Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice Committee and the Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice, and was appointed by the governor to serve on the Utah Sentencing Commission and the Salt Lake County Mayor to serve on the Criminal Justice Advisory Council. He was also appointed as the national chairman for the Law and Justice Committee for the National Conference of State Legislatures and served on the board of the Council of State Governments Criminal Justice Center. Representative Hutchings is a nationally recognized leader in criminal justice reform and has trained and spoken to organizations across the nation on policing reform. He's also led the reform of Utah's own criminal justice system. So again, just appreciate the panelists being here this evening. And again, just keep in mind as we go through the discussions to jot your questions down and have those ready to go when we get to the Q&A shortly. But first, let's go ahead and kick off the discussion. I guess, well, first let's do some ground rules, make sure that we all know how much time we should be speaking. And so I guess the last thing for our table setting discussion is that any question that is directed to a panelist specifically, please use 4 minutes of your time, as much as you'd like, but no more. And then if there's group questions that are just floated to the group generally, you'll have 2 minutes to respond. And then once we get to our specific questions about 2021 bills, we'll be looking at that 4-minute time frame as well. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. I'm sure you guys have heard enough of me talking, and let's get to the questions. So with the first topic, responding to the voices of the people, the first question, let's talk to Carl a bit about how community demands for police reforms play out both at the community level and how you maybe see those go into discussions with legislators. So Carl, specifically, what reforms are you hearing from the communities you advocate for? And how are you seeing those demands make their way to the Utah legislators?
All right, cool. So first, I just want to say thank you for letting me be here. I think it's important that we have people of color being representative, people of marginalized communities being represented, especially in a state like Utah, where it's kind of dominated by a certain culture. So I just want to say thank you for that. I want to talk about a few things and not necessarily how it goes into specific legislation, but I just want to, from my perspective and from the dealings that I've been in and the situations that I've been in, I want to talk about qualified immunity as being one of the most inappropriate ways of self-policing the police that there is. For people that don't understand what that is, that's when police departments, they're investigated by other police departments, and whether it's not their own police department, but it's an adjacent it's another police department. So it becomes natural for police departments to let people off, because it's the you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back type of a situation. And I think that is completely inappropriate. I think that the police departments, the police agencies need to be held accountable, not by themselves, by the community. Which is another thing, is I think that police officers should be held accountable for what they do, and especially when it comes to the murdering of people. I feel like just by being a police officer, they are not held accountable. Like, they're actually afforded a sense of immunity just because they are who they are, in the murdering of people and the discrimination of people and the outright stereotyping of people and oppression of people. So I would like to see our police officers being held accountable, and being held to a higher accountability than the general population, because it is a job. It is not something that they're born into, like us as people of color or us as people in marginalized communities. We just are. Whereas it's their occupation that they chose to be in, so they should be held accountable for those things. I would like to see the police officers come from the community that they serve, or live in the community that they serve, which is really hard in this day and age, because our cities have expanded to so many people. But my perspective is always from the indigenous perspective. And originally in indigeneity, you had communities that knew each other. So the people that were enforcing laws or things like that came from the community, and we knew each other. And when we don't know each other, there's a disconnect, and there's a more of a way to just set those people aside and go with your own feelings. I think that the first responders should be appropriate. I think that we send police officers out to situations where they're not trained in it, or they could actually escalate and do damage to the situation. I'm talking about like traumatic situations, violent situations, where domestic violent situations, or dealing with people with mental illnesses. So it would be really sending out the appropriate people. And then I can talk more about other things later, but yeah. And I want everyone to remember that we're all related. And so that's what this is all about, was we're all related, and we need to treat each other like relatives, like good relatives, and not set people aside as like them, us, them situation. So anyway, thanks.
Well, thanks, Carl. And I think that the community aspect is a huge part of this too. I definitely appreciate the voice you bring to this discussion tonight. So definitely we'll be looking to dive more into that idea as we go down the road on these topics. So next question for Molly, put you in the hot seat. So as a lobbyist, policy analyst, how do you respond to community demands and make them known to legislators? So if, for example, Carl came up to you and said what he just told everybody right now, what's that process look like on your end?
Well, I would say I am absolutely stoked that members of the public are concerned about some of those same issues that we're working on, and we need all the community support we can get to help get these things passed. I mean, I think legislators get sick of seeing the same old lobbyist faces up there. So if we can get some more engagement, that would be awesome. But this summer was obviously crazy for many reasons in regards to police reform, and there's so many different police reforms that we want to pass specifically here in Utah, but we don't have the capacity or the wheelhouse to do so for every single one of them, even though I'm sure my boss Connor, if anyone knows him, he would, if it wasn't for us, he would just be trying to write bills on all of them. But so what we do is we really look at the landscape and what the political kind of willpower is and what the media is saying. We say, what do we think is a workable solution that actually has a chance of passing, that's a good reform. And one of the ways we evaluate and come to these places of deciding which bills to move forward is talking to stakeholder groups. So, we have to talk with our partners over at ACLU or the Utah Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. We need to get the perspective of the Department of Public Safety, the Fraternal Order of Police, the courts. There's so many different agencies who will be impacted one way or another when we're talking about police reform. And so, gathering their perspective and trying to get all of their voices heard so we can get legislation they might not agree upon 100% of the time, but something that's a workable solution, something that they can actually implement if we pass it, is so important. And, there's been plenty of those. I know Department of Public Safety this summer in Utah hosted a number of meetings with community advocates from, everyone from Black Lives Matter and ACLU to Americans for Prosperity and some groups on the right and a number of legislators as well. So those are the kinds of first steps that we need to be taking when even just talking about what to move forward, and getting as many community voices heard as possible. But back to what Libertas does specifically, I would say it's about that relationship and coalition building so we can really understand, what the demands are in the communities and what's workable for us and what we have the capacity to do. Going back to the stakeholders and trying to see what's workable. And then lastly, the last step of that is legislation. We work on a number of bills every session. We try to find legislators who are passionate about the policy issues we work on, and we can see if we can work with them to formulate good language and to sponsor our legislation and move it forward.
Well, thanks, Molly. So there's a lot of steps between the community discussions that Carl raised to where it goes to Molly. Different stakeholders, lobbyists, policy analysts get into play. And then that brings us, of course, to the legislators. And so the next question is for both Representative Hutchings and Senator Iwamoto. And I guess I'll start with the senator. What have you been hearing from your constituents on police reform, and how have you responded?
Great. Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to the league and all the sponsors for having us. And I really appreciate all these organizations because they push public policy for democratic involvement and empowerment of women. And so I really appreciate that. And I'm really honored to be with all these other presenters and Representative Hutchings, who I thought we were going to do one good bill together this year, but I really appreciate him and his justice. So thank you. It's been interesting listening to everything because my district is not full of minorities like other districts are, but with everything happening and everything, it brought back to me my commitment to people of color, because I am a person of color. And I have always been involved in my communities and other communities of color here and in the Bay Area where I lived for a while practicing law. And so, I'm a Sanse, I'm a third generation of immigrants, and my grandfather was taken away. My mom's dad was taken away from his home in Ogden, Utah, and shackled and stripped and taken to the jail in Salt Lake and to other incarcerated around the country just because he was Japanese. So with the George Floyd killings and everything that's happening, it's nothing new, but I think what's happened in Utah and other places is a call to action. And so my district and the state have been very positive about wanting police reform in some way. They've talked about civil review boards to review police misconduct, so it could be more, impartial. They've talked about safe communities and funding for these communities. And we've seen how the communities of color have been disproportionately impacted. And so that is something that happens socially, economically, environmentally, health-wise and everything. So it's amazing how all these come together. Getting rid of qualified immunity has been discussed, demilitarization, de-escalation training, defunding the police. And you know, it's not what the words say. It's a more, I haven't heard of anyone wanting to actually defund the police, but to make sure that we have money for social, mental, and behavioral health experts that maybe could help on the scene. Implicit bias and diversity training, and then accountability and transparency. And data collection. I really appreciated that story that the Salt Lake Tribune did, because it was shocking to know that we don't have that data collection that we can make good decisions. That's similar to disaggregation of data, like in the American and Pacific Islander communities. There's like 18.9 million people and 40 million of Asian Pacific Islanders by 2060. And it's a diverse and complex, multifaceted subgroup. And I was just, if you don't have that disaggregated information, how can you pinpoint how to help in education, how to help in social disparities? And so that's unmasking the mask of this, of having, you know, that information not disaggregated, because I don't know of many people who know how many AAPI is in there. It's Korean, Indonesian, Laotian, Japanese, Korean, Pacific Islander, Taiwanese, Guam, India. It goes on, and we just lump them all together. And I think that's really important as far as data collection that we do there. So those are some of the things that we've been doing and hearing from my constituents. And also we've had panels. We had a panel with the Senate with all the community members. We've we have the DPS, which is the Department of Public Safety. And I've just seen a coming together with the Utah League of Cities and Towns and UAC and all the groups that Chief Ross has been wonderful getting the sheriffs together. And anyway, my time's up, but there's a lot of interest, and I hope that we can move the needle. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Iwamoto. We definitely will have some time to dig into some of those details coming up soon. And Representative Hutchings, like turning it to you, I also want you to keep in mind too, your 20 years of experience up at the Hill. That's, you've seen a lot. And so if you could speak to that too, just historically, how does legislature respond to these sort of things from community groups?
I love that you asked me actually in exactly that way. First though, again, a shout out. Could not be more excited that you guys are doing this. The stars really have kind of aligned. Senator Iwamoto just commented on that. This is a cool time. It really is. And to your point, Jason, to your question, actually, when I first got in the legislature, it was, if you were frustrated about something, if there was something that you felt like was not being taken care of public safety wise, the simple answer was just to escalate everything, put an enhancement on it, turn every misdemeanor into a felony. And I actually at one point started tracking along with a gentleman from the University of Utah, Steve Erickson, who was just looking at all the new laws that we made every year. Things that last year weren't even illegal, but then somebody got frustrated, went to the legislature and found a reason to make a new law. And we were just locking up more people for longer periods of time. And it was, I mean, that was the answer to everything. It was a hammer. And I actually, you guys, I think by the time we get done here, if there's a message that I can communicate, it's, I read a great book a little while ago called Factfulness. And the gentleman that wrote it was an epidemiologist. And he said, you need to recognize when things are working because you need to have the energy to keep up the fight. And if you feel like things aren't working, if nothing's ever going to change, it's really hard to stay motivated. It's hard to stay in the game. But I would tell you, man, things are working. This effort is working. Progress is being made, and we're not done. We're not where we need to be. And I know in some instances, it's kind of weird being on a panel like this because as a Republican, Caucasian, male Mormon in Utah, I think right after that, most people hyphenate it with evil personified. I represent everything that's wrong in the world. And I would just encourage people to see that you can get allies from everywhere. And the neat thing about the way that the reform is happening, when I did the JRI stuff, the Justice Reform Initiative, Reinvestment Initiative, excuse me. It was interesting because when you would talk to people in big groups, they would be a little guarded, but then you would have all of these conversations in the hallway, and everybody, every family has been impacted by crime or by substance abuse or by mental health. Everybody gets this. Everybody has a story. And to be able to openly talk about that and to be able to discuss that has been huge. But more importantly, and Senator Iwamoto actually brought this up, the reason, you guys, why I believe that we're on the verge of doing something really special in this area and really seeing some significant changes is because of data. When we started doing the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, we started in 2014. So we were looking for data from 2013, didn't have it. We didn't collect it. You guys, it's only been the last few years that you would have the different courthouses that would even talk to each other. Systems didn't connect, resources didn't connect. You could have somebody, I'll give you a classic example. Maybe somebody suffering from a mental health issue, nobody's gonna know about that, didn't. And so to Carl's point, when somebody rolls up on someone having an episode in the community, are they being bad? Are they having a mental health episode? Do they need law enforcement? Do they need somebody to come in that's got some special crisis intervention training? We can have that conversation now, and we are right on the verge of putting that kind of data together between the courts and the Board of Pardons. The legislature, I believe this year, is going to do groundbreaking stuff to make that happen. And it's made me really optimistic about what the next several years can do, helping us to move this forward.
Cool, thanks, Representative Hutchins. And I think you kind of teed up the next question on this topic area. And I think this can maybe kind of speak to just generally kind of frustrations people feel when they see the community demands or concerns, and then we don't see it manifest into law, right? A lot of times we'll see it not make it to even get into like a bill draft. And even if it's made into a bill, there's no guarantee, even if a lot of people support an idea, that it's going to actually be signed into law a few months later. And so I'm just going to open it up to the panel. And I think for our panelists too, in the lower, I guess the bottom of the screen, there's a little raise hand function. You click it, it'll give you a little yellow hand that'll pop up. Whoever wants to speak to this, just click on the little button and I'll call on you we'll avoid crosstalk that way.
Not seeing the hand raised, but is it okay if I start?
Yeah, if you could just raise your physical hand too, totally cool. Let's do it.
So a couple of things you guys can do to help us. If you haven't dealt with policy before, we need to be specific and we need to have lots of different viewpoints. And I'll give you a classic, for instance. We have been trying to figure out what the racial disparities are in the criminal justice system in the incarcerated population. We don't track that. Why? Because we don't, at one point it was argued that race should never be a part of the conversation and it shouldn't be on somebody's record. And so when somebody gets arrested, it shouldn't be documented. Well, the challenge with that is kind of on both sides. It's appropriate. I actually support that idea. I think justice needs to stay blind. But then when you turn around and try and have a conversation about how are we doing in different communities, it gets really complicated because you have two different needs that are very conflicting. And so what we have to have, what we really need help with from the legislative side, we can't just do broad stuff. Like I joke that people tell me all the time, hey, why don't you fix education? And I think, well, I'll run a bill and it'll say education is therefore fixed. But if you can get specific, get down to, you know, what exactly is it? Carl had several good points that he made about those specific needs that have to happen, because then you can take those and put them into very concrete actions, but it has to be looked at so that we don't end up hurting people unintentionally, hurting victims again because of the way we make them testify or report or put personal information out there that shouldn't be out there. The more eyes we have on it from the more backgrounds, it is super critical in order to be able to make it work. So anybody that's listening that hasn't been engaged, that would like to be engaged in that way, would be just tremendously beneficial.
Well, thank you. And I saw Senator Iwamoto go first, and we'll get to Carl next.
I was just going to give some practical things too, that we do legislation right after the session ends, but we give about a month, but we can file legislations because a lot of people are coming to me with different ideas now, and it's really too late to get something drafted. We have so many priorities in drafting, but the public can always get involved. It's harder this year a little bit, but we want public comment by going to, you can track bills at le.utah.gov, and you can track the legislation, see when they're in committees, and there's a way to attend publicly, but I would urge people to do virtual too, because I just don't know what it's going to be like in the session, during that. And to get things passed too, it is working with stakeholders and making sure that you work with everybody, and especially with these kind of bills, to make sure you're with the communities of color and that they lead almost the conversations because they know it. And I just wanted to talk about diversity in everything, because I think what's important in policy too, and making policy, is how, we don't getting diversity in the judiciary and in the education field. I was just saw my cousin the other night, Sunday night, and works in a Title I school, and she said, I'm going to retire, but I don't want to retire because I'm the only teacher of color in that whole Title I school, and students need to see someone that represents them too. And so I think it's important that people get involved, and different experiences are really important. But I think just to say the conversation has to include, I'm getting off the subject, but criminal justice and social and environmental justice, so many things are linked together. And with these bills, getting these police reform bills, it's so important that we engage our communities of color. And like Representative Hutchings said, I think we can find allies everywhere. So we need to all pull together for these racial inequities and disparities and getting these kind of bills passed.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it sounds like specificity, staying in there, right? Not just giving up because the session's over. And also diversity and inclusion is huge, right? Because you have to look at the impact of communities, especially when they're disproportionately impacted, has already been discussed here in Utah, just right out the gate. And Carl, if you could bring us in with the next response.
Yeah, so I just wanted to continue on with what Representative Hutchings has said about the data and the need to know people's ethnicities. It is so important. So at PANDOS, we have a committee called the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Committee, and we deal with that whole epidemic. And if you don't know what it is, you really should look it up. But it is real, and it's unfortunately, it's all too real. But with that, we've seen is a lot of times people will go missing or are murdered, and they're not properly categorized as Indigenous people. And that could be for a lot of different reasons, whether it's their last name is not a typical Indigenous last name, or they were presenting as white. It's like, we really need to know who these people are so that we can have that data, so that we can, give the public a really clear picture of who are being stolen, who are being affected the most. And then, and then we can, and then we can properly look at that. Whereas a lot of people would like to say that there is no problem. It's the same people that say, well, I'm colorblind, I don't see color, whatever. Well, if you're colorblind, you need to see color. All you're doing is putting a blanket over everything and saying that everyone's okay, everything's good. And this is a problem that we've seen with the Black Lives Matter movement. It's like, we're not saying that Black lives are the only people that matter. We're saying that Black lives need to matter, period. And with that, I just want to say, with legislation, I want to talk specifically about Lex Scott and Black Lives Matter Utah, and her ability or her willingness to do what is being talked about, is talking to everybody, talking to Republicans, talking to Democrats, and because that is really what needs to happen. We need to get everybody on board. And I just want to give a shout out to Black Lives Matter Utah, because I wholeheartedly support it. And it is something that's making different, and we need to continue on. So blessings.
Well, thanks, Carl. I don't see any other hands raised right now, but I think that, Carl, what you got into the last part of that comment really speaks to kind of the nature of how legislation gets made or doesn't made, as far as like who gets involved. And I think criminal legal reform here in Utah, at least in my experience, doesn't usually, your party affiliation doesn't dictate what you think about criminal legal reform. And that's a really interesting thing here in Utah, is how that plays out. And I'm just curious if any of the, here's kind of an impromptu question. I didn't give you guys a heads up on this one. But how does that play out here in Utah as far as criminal legal reform, especially with policing reform? Is it a party lines thing? Is it not a party lines thing? Or what does that look like? And okay, so I think Molly and then Carl. Thanks.
Yeah, so I've been through 3 legislative sessions now up at the Utah Capitol, and I'm originally from Michigan, so when I came in, it was very new to me. It's just obviously a very Republican conservative dominated state, which is not how it is in Michigan. And I think there's kind of a nationwide narrative that Democrats are the party of reform. And I found that to not be true here in Utah. Republicans are very willing to engage in the conversation. And in fact, we have some of the best reforms with criminal justice in the entire country. Some of first of the nation, privacy reforms, and the way we were able to pass bail reform last year. I won't get too much into that, but and JRI with Representative Hutchings. And yeah, I think that Republicans are willing to have the conversation and willing to pass legislation. I think it has to be maybe more nuanced than it would be in some bluer states, but certainly not off the table. And I think the stereotype of Republicans not wanting to engage in criminal justice reform is wrong. And yeah, I would say if you question that, look at what Utah has accomplished in the past few years.
Oh, thanks, Molly. Carl.
Yeah, so again, like I have a unique perspective to this because I've been out there. I've been out there at the Black Lives Matter rallies. I've been out there at the Back the Blue rallies. Just go watch any of my videos, and it's really interesting because, well, one interesting thing is in Utah. Not Utah specifically, but we have Republicans and then we have Trumpians, and it's like these people that support President Trump are like, it's its own category. And so it's not necessarily Republicans, but it's its own category. But what I've seen is you have the Black Lives Matter people, and then you have a Blue Lives Matter people, and the Blue Lives Matter people are blue lives. And they're saying they support that there's no problem with the policing. There's no problem with the way that things are handled. And I really feel like it's not necessarily party, but it's Trumpian, if that makes sense. I don't know, but really fast, I want to give a shout out to Utahns Against Police Brutality. It's like groups that are actually doing things. Salt Lake Equal Rights Movement, Black Lives for Humanity Movement, and Black Lives Matter Utah, the PSL also. So, and I just want to give a shout out to them because those are people that are really doing boots on the ground work and like rallying people together to make a difference. And it does take rallying, and it does take actually getting to the legislature, getting to the lobbying point, getting to representatives and senators. Like it is actually getting to the people and talking to them, because a lot of times we'll do these rallies and we rally ourselves up, but it doesn't go anywhere. It has to go somewhere. And we have to continue on with the pressure with those things. That's it.
So, thanks, Carl. Yeah, I think it's a really good point, just about exercising the First Amendment, and that, especially from the community perspective, that a lot of this stuff is literally community lobbying, right? The community lobbying for their own interests, and that includes doing your First Amendment activities and also contacting your legislators, which is part of this entire process. So that concludes the time we have for the Voice of the People topic discussion. There's still plenty more we can chat about for sure. And so if there's anything that we didn't quite get to in that section and you have some questions, please put them into the chat. I see there's already a few already to go, but happy to get to those once we get to that portion. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to open it up and talk about the specific legislation for the 2021 session. And again, this is like a 4-minute, I guess, time limit. And it's really tough to even talk about 2 bills within 4 minutes. But as we go through it, if we have more time at the end, we can definitely chat a little bit more and get some responses in. So let's go ahead. I think this hand raising system worked just fine. So just open up for everybody. What police reform bills are you currently supporting, working on, or sponsoring? And Senator Iwamoto, I saw your hand go up first.
Well, there's a lot of bills on police reform. I was talking to Esther Chelsea McCarthy, who does a lot of these drafting of bills. And then I wish I could share these with you, but I got the list and there's a great number of them and not all that I would know about because tend to be working on our own bills. And but there are a lot of good bills. I did have a couple bills that I'm working on, companion bills, and I had done a lot with campus safety a couple of years ago. And then as I was doing that bill for campus safety plans on the campus, then it led to some questions about police issues on how do campus police communicate with outlying law enforcement. And so we're doing this study now from Senate Bill 80 that we're doing with USHE and all the higher ed that we'll get some results by November of this year. But during that process, I was looking into when a peace officer leaves their position and goes possibly to another one, and they're being investigated. And Representative Perry had done some work on this, but there were some loopholes. And so I have 2 companion bills on this issue. And one is making sure that both of them are about accountability and transparency and making sure that the investigations are completed and that, and so it's been a good process. And it is true, you have to get all the stakeholders, and I'm always not sure, do I have everyone? But one of the bills passed through interim unanimously, and then the companion bill is being worked on where a law enforcement agency talks to another law enforcement agency and what information should go back and forth so that these investigations are completed. The other one deals with disclosure to post on their investigations and making sure that the loopholes are covered. And so one thing, Tom Ross, he's now going to head the CCJJ, and he's been wonderful. He was head of the sheriffs, and he said to me, and I want to say, we have a lot of great law enforcement, and it's not everything against law enforcement. And he said to me, we can take people's property and we can take their lives. So we better be accountable. And so he has been a proponent, and the Utah League of Cities and Towns and Black Lives Matter had been at the one bill, and the NAACP and other groups. And we've been working a lot on these bills to make sure that we have as most open and transparency and enough so that peace officers will be able to talk when there's someone that is not abiding by the law, because no one wants a bad police officer to tarnish their name or hurt or injure somebody. So it's been a really great experience. That's just a couple that I'm working on. And I'm also doing a statewide review of minority disparities too, so we can get more documentation. But there's other bills like de-escalation. I know Representative Romero's working on, and maybe Representative Hutchings could give you more. I do have a lot of in this bill list. And there's things for mental health protections for people, for police, and for use of force. I know there's some for that, and there's just a whole bunch of bills that are going on. So we'll see how they go. I don't know how they've been vetted, some of them or not, but I think we all try to vet them as good as we can before the session starts. And sometimes we can vet them good by going through interim committees and getting their approval so that when the session comes, we're ready.
Well, thanks, Senator. And I just want to ask panelists if you do know the bill number, and I think one of those bill numbers was SB 13 on the post reporting requirements. If you happen to know those, if you note them as we're going through, so anybody who's watching can put them on their bill tracker and follow along as we go through the session, that'd be great. Yeah, I guess anybody, I guess I didn't see any other hands. Representative Hutchings, and then we'll get to Molly.
Thanks, Jason. Senator Iwamoto mentioned a minute ago about the tracker, just so you guys know that it's out there. She gave the website, but it's LE for the legislature.utah.gov. So it's the legislature at utah.gov. So you can do a keyword too. That's how I've usually done it in the past and encourage constituents to do it. So you can use keywords and it'll help you find bills that'll track those. But one maybe other really kind of exciting area that I feel like we're going to be able to make a lot of progress in. You guys have heard about what we've been able to do with the mental health crisis line, right? So I think one of the challenges that we've had historically is that law enforcement was the only game in town. We didn't have until just literally months ago, there wasn't even a mental health hotline. If you had somebody in crisis, you dialed 911. If you had somebody beating someone, you dialed 911. If you had a rabid dog in your yard, you dialed 911. You dialed 911 for everything. Well, the problem was for too long, law enforcement has been a badge and a gun and a jail. And that's all the tools we gave them. And it's unfortunate because we haven't provided more alternatives and more options and more ways to engage with the public. But there are things happening right now. Representative Ellison with the mental health work that he's done, Senator Thatcher with Safe UT app that has helped prevent, I have no idea how many suicides to this point and dangerous situations at schools. But the mental health part's very exciting, you guys. There are diversion programs that are being developed very aggressively. Senator Iwamoto mentioned Tom Ross helped to put one together in Davis County, where law enforcement now has an option. If they see someone in crisis and they've been crisis intervention trained, and they know they're not being criminal, but they need to have help, law enforcement can now be the good guy and they can actually go take that person to a place where it's not criminal. You're not going to get mugshotted. You're not going to get incarcerated. You're going to be in a safe place with people that can surround you to help you get resources. And we're not going to create some kind of weird criminal record for doing so. And we can start branching out into some of those areas that Carl talked about with domestic violence and other things like that, where we can send the right people for the right reason to the right place and help people in crisis and put out all these other new instruments that we didn't used to have before. And I have never seen anything like the environment that we're in right now. We have to continue to push hard. We got to drive it with data so that we can put the funding and the resources in the right place. But I'm very optimistic. This last year when we had a really bad budget environment, lots of things got cut, but one thing that didn't get cut, at least out of my committee, and everything got cut, but the receiving center, the diversion center effort to help people with mental health issues to be able to have a safe place to go that's not criminally involved, that did not get cut. And I'm really proud of that. And I share that just to encourage people that we really are, the mindset has shifted. We're not there, we're not done. I'm not saying that for even a second, but the opportunity to really push it and make some great progress is right now. It's just, I couldn't be more excited about where we're going to be in the next couple of years because of this.
Thanks, Representative. I think that really shows, especially after Senator Iwamoto gave her the short list of her long list of bills that she's looking at and sponsoring, is that we're seeing a huge gamut from accountability and transparency for police to actually helping the individuals that need the help in their situations, as you spoke to, Representative. So really interesting to kind of hear how large this idea of police reform really is. Molly, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah. And I'll giggle a little bit to myself as Jason, the moderator, is working on these bills hand in hand with Libertas Institute. He's one of our coalition partners, the ACLU of Utah, as well as a few others. So he's heard me explain these many times, but I'll go over a few, really important police reform bills that we're putting forth this session with our legislative partners and some other coalition members. So one of them I'll bring up first because it was mentioned by Carl is qualified immunity. And just to remind you, the audience, what qualified immunity is, it's a court doctrine that was created out of whole cloth. It's a legal liability shield that shields individual officers from being sued in civil court. So this means that if an officer, has some sort of misconduct on their record and the prosecutor fails to prosecute them, maybe it doesn't quite rise to the level of a criminal prosecution, then the only other avenue for citizens to hold that officer accountable is within civil court by bringing a lawsuit forward. And qualified immunity, this doctrine, shields citizens from being able to do so. So, like as Carl was saying, it's pretty, it prevents accountability from when misconduct occurs. So this summer, we saw some significant reform come out of Colorado. Specifically, SB 217 was a major police reform bill that they passed this past summer. And we are working, the bill is not public yet, unfortunately, so I don't have any information about who's sponsoring it. I don't think the sponsor wants to be public yet, but look out for it. It's going to create a sort of state analog to Section 1983, which is our main federal rights, civil rights statute. So basically our bill mimics this federal rights statute on the state level. It opens up the state courts for civil rights violations that would typically be handled in federal court. So the benefit is we're handling qualified immunity kind of as a blanket protection for things like excessive force claims, unlawful arrests, things of that nature. And so that's one bill that we're working on to address Utah's qualified immunity statute. Doesn't cover everything, doesn't eliminate qualified immunity, but it's still a step and it's something that's workable. So we think it's a good step in the right direction. Another one is forcible entry. This was a big, contention this summer, is talking about no-knock warrants and forcible entry into people's homes. It's pretty dangerous for the individuals within the home and the officers themselves. And we saw this with the Breonna Taylor case. So we're working to effectively ban no-knock warrants unless an existing imminent threat of serious bodily injury or death exists. So unless that exists, officers have to do a knock and announce. They have to announce themselves. And we also, part of that bill is adding some requirements for a knock and announce. We want to give the individual reasonable time to answer the door and make sure law enforcement announces themselves loud and clear before bursting into an individual's home. We think that's so important for, Fourth Amendment rights as far as privacy, and protection of everyone involved. Another one, I'll just kind of go through these quickly, is use of force. So this is another kind of contentious issue that we saw a lot of discussion about over the summer. And essentially this creates is a number of pieces, but it bans officers from employing additional force if an individual is already properly restrained, as well as creates a duty to intervene without regard for chain of command. And that is obviously quite relevant to the George Floyd case. There's a few others, but my time is up, so.
So thanks, Molly. And that's the hard part about this discussion, is that if you just go to your legislative tracker and look at your law enforcement bill lists, it's quite a few, and it's really hard to kind of figure out what the most important ones are, because they're all super important and very much necessary. And I guess, Carl, is there anything particular that you're looking at sponsoring or looking at working on? Sorry. Okay. So actually that gives us, we have a little bit more time. If anybody else wanted to know just a couple of things that they're working on or sponsoring or supporting that we didn't get a chance to talk about yet. Good, Molly, Carl, let's, yeah, you could jump in.
Yeah, I don't know. I just, so what I like to do in my life or in my videos and things that I do is kind of expose people to the fact that we all live in a certain worldview. We all live in a bubble, and we only judge other people by the bubble that we grew up in. And so as Molly is speaking about like some of these things of like allowing a certain amount of time until they just barge in or announcing themselves or something like that. I've seen where other people can look at that and they'll say, I don't get it. Like if they just don't do anything wrong, then nothing will be, like just don't do a crime and then you don't have to worry about anything. Or like, why should we wait so long? I really want people to understand that there are certain aspects, sorry, dog just came in. There are certain aspects to like situations that you don't really understand unless you're in that situation. I mean, like the no knock or like allowing people time is like somebody might straight up be like in a weird situation or like straight up naked, and it's like the violation of that could be traumatic. If a police officer is going to come in and not necessarily the person that they're even looking for, but if somebody is naked or in some weird or in a intimate situation, it's like that causes along down the road like that's traumatic. And police officers shouldn't be putting people in situations where that trauma can come back and have PTSD. And that's just something I want to bring up is like really look at the situation and not assume that you understand and not necessarily, I don't know. I can't explain anything. I suck.
But no, that's great, Carl. That idea that like these aren't just laws that just are literally just in a thick book that nobody looks at and dusts off once in a while. Like these affect people. These affect people in the community, and so that's one big part about the legislative process. Is if you go up, I guess this year we won't go up to the Capitol, but we'll be watching on WebEx or Zoom. But we'll be hearing people's stories that support these bills, right? Because a lot of legislation that I've worked on and I've seen worked on is driven by stories and people's personal impact. And so, Carl, what you're getting at is exactly that, right? Is like we can't just be thinking abstractly about this. These are like our friends, our neighbors, our families that are being impacted. And especially in some communities, much more so than others, for sure. And so, yeah, that's a fantastic point to think about as we look at legislation, both this year and then in the future. And Molly, I know you had your hand raised.
Yeah, if there's still a few more minutes for more legislation, I'd be happy to go over that, but I'm not sure if I have time.
Yeah, a couple minutes.
Okay.
I think we'll be good. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll just jump right into it then. And I want to say that these bills that I'm talking about have not been made public. They could be tonight. There's bills being published all the time this time of year. But we do on our website, libertasutah.org, we track all of these, and all these bills that I'm talking about will be tracked once they're made public there. So it's kind of an easy resource. But the other bill I just kind of want to quickly mention is dealing, kind of goes hand in hand with what Senator Iwamoto's bill is. And it's a bill dealing with the peace officer standards and training, which is kind of the uniform state group, kind of the overseer umbrella organization of a lot of the police departments, or of all the police departments in Utah. And so we essentially pulled a bunch of data a bunch of the police policy manuals from departments across the state this summer, with the help of ACLU and the UACDL. And we found that unfortunately, when it comes to penalizing police officers for misconduct and for policy violations, there is not a uniform process protecting individual officers' due process rights and The categorization of violation is just vastly different from department to department. So we, envision a system where POST, the Peace Officer Standards and Training, has a uniform process for complaints against individual officers and a standardized investigation process with clear criteria for officer due process as well. So that way it's, one organization, it's tracked and in an effective way. And for we're talking about the importance of data, having it in one place will be great for knowing how to move forward with that as well. So that's our other big police reform bill. Just wanted to highlight that quick. Thanks, Jason.
Oh, thanks, Molly. And I think that it's a good segue to our next question too. We have a lot of bills, and we all are trying to get as much passed as we can in these issue areas because they're super important. But the question is, and this might lead to some speculation, but based on the bills that we talked about, which ones do you think are most likely to pass? Or maybe one that we didn't get a chance to speak to, but what legislation do you think is going to make it all the way to the governor's desk coming up this spring? And it's cool if nobody wants to speculate. I got plenty of things to ask you. Senator Iwamoto.
Well, I'm just going to say it's a difficult question because, well, maybe Representative Hutchings would know what priorities for their caucus, but a lot of these bills haven't become public yet. And I don't know how they've been worked up and all the things they've gone through. So that's why it's a little difficult to know. I know hopefully the ones that the community has been involved in, the communities of color, what are important to them, that those come through. But there's so many of them that I couldn't say, but maybe Molly would have an idea too, and others. But so.
Yeah, no pressure, Molly. But yeah, this is kind of an odd question, but I think that's the realities of the legislative process, right? Like we're a week away and we still don't quite know the answer to some of these questions, right? With a lot of certainty.
Well, I want to just talk and think. I don't know if the public knows all about our Office of Leg Research and General Counsel, because I'm not kidding. Since the last session, we haven't had hardly any break, and neither have they. And we had a law passed where you can prioritize certain bills for drafting. And so the Senate has 5, the House has 4, and they have been working on special session bills and interim bills. And so that's part of the reason. And then a lot of times you want to research them, and then some of these bills don't ever get drafted. You end up dropping them because maybe you resolved them or whatnot. So I just want to tell you how hardworking staff we have at the Capitol. They are just an amazing group of people, and they work their heads off. So
well, thanks, Senator. That's very true. And then I think Molly, and then Representative Hutchings.
Yeah, and Senator is absolutely right that it's impossible to tell. We have not all the bill files are public yet, or sorry, the bill text, but we've seen the titles of a lot of the bills, and I think we've estimated there's over 60 bills dealing somehow with police reform in one way or another. So that's a lot. And so, you wonder in those circumstances, is legislative leadership going to step in and make people, or encourage people to combine some of the bills? Is there going to be overlap? I'm sure. But I think one bill that we see maybe having a better chance than others passing is the forcible entry bill, which has to do with, banning no-knock warrants and putting restrictions on knock and announce. And the reason for that is because this is not a policy that just kind of popped up in response to everything that went down this summer. It's something that the Utah legislature has been working on for quite some time. We're actually the only state who tracks the use of SWAT teams in these forcible entry raids. And we've been collecting that data for quite some time. And we found that most of the SWAT team deployment is actually being used for simple drug possession and drug raids, which isn't necessarily the cases maybe we should be using militarized police in. So we think we have that supporting data. The legislature has passed things on this before. And I think a lot of the police departments that we've talked to, they don't want to put their officers in these risky positions anyways. We know, up in Bountiful, the police chief told us that he hasn't used no-knock warrants in 10 years with his officers. They do surround and call out when they have high-risk situations, just because it's too risky and it's not worth, taking a life over, evidence that's flushed down the toilet or whatever it is. So that's something that I think I'm hopeful will pass this session.
Oh, thanks, Mel. And I think that really goes to the point that Carl's making too, just like who gets impacted, right? Who gets impacted about these SWAT enforcements? If it's low-level drug, people involved with low-level drug offenses, then is that really what we think should be happening in these cases? And also goes back to the data those raised too. And I think Representative, you wanted to chime in?
Yeah, so thanks, Molly, for bringing that up on the data tracking. A little shout out to our recently elected Lieutenant Governor. Senator Henderson was actually the one that passed that bill. And I only know that because I was her House sponsor for beginning the tracking of those. But I would just, bills will be combined and all of that. But one thing that I would encourage people is when you get into the game, doesn't matter how genius your idea is, the odds of your idea becoming law exactly the way that you asked for it, it's pretty slim. When I did the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, biggest effort I ever did, and we went through 8 drafts of it, mostly because the Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice, wonderful organization for Utah, but we would take it out and there's all kinds of people. There's prosecutors, defense attorneys, victims advocates, judges. Everybody looked at it, ripped it to shreds, and we went back and started over. And then we'd bring out another improved version, and then we would rip it to shreds and then start over. You have to have a mindset when you deal with legislation. And Carl brought it up. You got to look at it from different perspectives. And I'll give you just one. Body cameras. There's some legislation being talked about in relationship to body cameras. And it makes a ton of sense. But then you have to nuance it, because you go back to if footage is being taken, and it was just said, if you have a no-knock and you break in and something really weird's going on in there, do I really want that footage public? And some people have done some really weird things with crime scene videos and things like that. There was a group in California that was, for whatever reason, they took all these crime scene videos from like really horrific murders and car accidents, and we're posting them online. And what if you have little children that are victims? This is why it's so important from people from all different backgrounds to be willing to come in, get involved, get in the game, because we have to have the perspective of people in the minority community, people of color, men, women, older people, younger people, people that go to college, people that are in law enforcement. If we don't look at it from all the different directions, you're going to get a biased result. And people need to be passionate about being involved, getting in the game, and voicing their concerns when they have them, and being really passionate about sticking in there until they do see things get modified and changed. And I've seen wonderful changes made to lots of legislation because people came in and said, yeah, but did you ever consider, or are you aware of? And we need everybody, just be tough, be thick-skinned, stick in there with us, and help us make things go right.
Well, thanks, Representative. And I think we're going to do like a very quick lightning round in this last question to make sure we give as much time as we can for the Q&A portion. Just quickly, and this could be like a general category or a specific bill, but what reform measures do you believe are the most important going into this 2021 session? Representative.
Mental health, hands down. We didn't have it before. Again, going back to data, in the last 2 years, we now know that some 70% of the people that are incarcerated in Utah jails have a dual diagnosis, mental health, substance abuse. And if we don't start doing a good job of helping people that suffer from mental illness, we are going to victimize a lot of people and hurt a lot of families. Mental health is critical. Have to get good at it.
Cool, thank you. Carl.
So ending qualified immunity, holding people accountable, like accountability is so critical. Again, being a police officer is a job. It's not like me where I'm born like this, you know, it's like you really, we need to hold our police officers to the highest standard because of like what's been said before, is they have a toolbox and they are trained with weapons or firearms and with sending people to jail. You know, it's like that's what they know, that's what they do. And so we really got to hold people accountable. We've seen like so many murders, and I'm straight up calling them murders because I don't know what else to call them. Life is so important, which is interesting because we have these people who are saying all lives matter, yet they don't really believe all lives matter. They only believe that certain lives matter, because I believe that all lives really do matter. And you know, and why are we like using military force for someone for a drug offense, you know, or for these, or why are we shooting, like why was Lyndon Cameron shot, this 13-year-old autistic boy? Why was he shot in the back? You know, why was he shot? You know, why do we have people getting shot? Why was Bernardo shot over 20, 30 times, you know, running away? It's like, we really got to hold people accountable, because if they're not, then it'll continue on. And our culture it's already screwed up enough. But that's the first thing, is we really got to change. We got to hold people accountable, because it's unrespectable. We can't respect anything. We can't respect any kind of a system that doesn't have any accountability.
Well, thanks, Carl. So accountability, transparency, mental health, Molly, or Senator Iwamoto. So
I agree. Mental health and the whole issues of including the community's color, and just what we've seen federally and here lately. But I also think the data collection is important, and making sure that we make these decisions based on good data and evidence. But I agree. I think I'm up there with mental health and behavioral health. So thank you.
cool, thank you. And Molly, if anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, personally, mental health is a huge issue. I completely agree with that being the number one issue for me personally. As an organization, that's not something that we had kind of the wheelhouse to take on this year. So out of the bills that we're working on, I would say I agree with Carl, qualified immunity. We're not ending it, unfortunately. We're not abolishing it, but this bill is going to make it less burdensome to bring lawsuits forward in our state courts and utilize those. So as an accountability measure, that's very important.
Cool. Thanks, Molly. And now we're going to shift over to the Q&A portion. And so I know some of these questions are pretty lengthy, and I'll try to kind of get the gist or the spirit of the question, if not the verbatim words. So yeah, and these responses just open up for everybody. We'll just kind of do the hand raising system. But the first question that we have here is a little bit about what we talked about already. So looking at the police use of like over militarized police forces that escalate situations, do there need to be ground rules for how law enforcement shows up to a situation? And part of that question too is, you know, what can we do to increase the use of de-escalation techniques and get law enforcement trained for those who are experiencing mental illness? Sorry, Molly.
Yeah, I'll answer the first part of that. I'll leave the second half to maybe Hutchings, who's well prepared in that area of legislation. But the first part, you know, we've actually tried in the past to demilitarize the police through the limitation of the 1033 program, which is the federal program that allows our local police department with no local or state oversight to essentially get formerly used military gear for free. They have to pay for shipping, but a lot of times there's federal grants to cover the cost. And so they're getting all sorts of weapons and vehicles and armored vehicles, grenade launchers, things of that nature. And there's over 8,000 police departments in the US who utilize the program in 49 states right now. And very few states have accountability of how these weapons are being used. Even departments like tracking of getting the weapons in the first place and the gear, it's not great. So it would be great to have some sort of accountability measure. We don't have any bill in this session that I know of. But maybe even getting city council approval before getting gear from the 1033 program, or maybe even a state oversight program or tracking. Colorado, that was part of their SB 217 bill this summer, is kind of putting some locks and some accountability measures on the 1033 program. And I know some other states are looking at it as well. So I would like to see Utah follow suit with that.
Thanks, Molly. Carl.
So I know this wasn't really the question, but I want to bring up this point because I think this is at the heart of a lot of this. It would be like capitalism and what motivates us, and it's money, and it's like this prison profit, prisons that are private prisons, and the profit that comes from that. And when it comes to the militarization of police forces, I mean, Molly just listed all of these things, and all of that makes money, costs money, brings in money. It's just like our military, like our military budget. It's like all of these things. It's money that really at the bottom of it, it's all money. And so we really need to change our perspective on like what is important, what is valuable. And again, it comes back to what I say is valuable. It's like life. It's life and respecting each other and not respecting the money. And it's hard when money is involved because because money pays for lobbyists and money pays for people's campaigns and all of these things. And it's unfortunate. It's like, yeah. So I'm just saying like, this is, our culture is a culture of making money off of things, making money off of niches, whether that's a grenade launcher, whether that's a tank, whether that's AR-15s or vehicles or whatever. It's like everybody wants to make money off of something. Everyone wants to contract. That's because that's where the money is. So if we can just freaking look for a moment at our culture, which is really the problem. I keep saying this, our freaking culture is the problem because of our prioritization of valuing life, really. Just a thought.
Thanks, Carl. Yeah, I think that's the holistic approach to this stuff, right? Because this isn't just living in a bubble. This is how we look at the world around us, right? And we got to do that same lens, whether it's these issues or other things as well. I guess we'll go ahead and move on to the next question. So there's a question from a person that was considered a minority within their law enforcement department as an immigrant woman. And noticed that as a civilian employee in that department for quite some time, that the department itself, a lot of people were related to each other, literally and figuratively, is kind of a big family. And there's this thing that's been called the blue curtain, where people within departments and agencies kind of protect themselves and look out for each other. So the question is, how do you avoid nepotism in law enforcement in Utah agencies? And is there an emphasis that's being placed on a more diversified workforce? Yeah, Carl?
Sorry, I don't want to take up a lot of time, but I think that this is an important point, and I just forgot it. Sorry.
That's right. We can come back to you. I think Representative Hutchings, you had your hand raised quickly.
Yeah, and I think you're going to see an awful lot of that. I think you're going to see a need for diversification, a demand even for it. But again, if you go back to it, a certain type of person plays in the NBA, a certain type of person is a professional wrestler. And for a long time, a certain type of person was law enforcement. You just had to have that type of kind of a mindset and a way of looking at the world, because it really was a very narrow, this is what we do. But now we're branching out into so many other new areas where we really are getting into crisis intervention, where we really are starting to talk about how do we help people divert out we've had conversations about helping people successfully re-enter. So, okay, you get in trouble, how do we get you back? Caseworkers, social workers, therapists to help people with the mental health. And I'll just throw out a thought for you. We ran into an interesting thing that occurred when we were talking about mental health that we could get a lot of help from, but it's one of these tangential ones. People that need it, we're struggling now for the first time ever as a legislator. About a year ago at a meeting with Salt Lake County, I heard the statement that we have plenty of money, but we can't find a therapist to hire. And it's because the mindset has shifted, the challenges have shifted, the emphasis has shifted. But you guys, as we branch out and better understand the demand in that area that population needs, we do not currently have the resources. There are not enough qualified, trained people coming out of college to handle the demand that we need the help with. And it doesn't seem like a law enforcement conversation, but we need really good social workers and mental health therapists. And we need the colleges and higher ed to help us as fast as they can to be able to help that population get educated and into the community.
Good. Thanks, Representative. And then we'll go to Carl, get back to your thought, and then jump over to Senator Iwamoto.
All right, I remember it now. So I feel like I do a lot of apologetics for like the things that I stand for. And so one of the things that is said a lot is there are no good cops in a racist system. That's one. And then I want to kind of say something about that is if there are good police officers, why are there bad police officers? And really think about it, because this is going to the question. If there are good police officers, why are there bad police officers? Why? Okay. And because it goes down to because the good police officers cannot out the bad police officers, or if they do, then they will have a target on their back, or that they won't be allowed in the club, or they won't have the certain whatever, you know, it's I don't know if you know what I'm saying. It's like, really, we have got to let or provide immunity for whistleblowers, right? Like, we've got to make sure that people can, like, if you see bad police officers, which they know who they are, right? Like, they should know who they are, so they should be able to out them and get rid of them, which kind of goes to another thing is like, how can we have bad police officers who were fired from their job or have shot someone and move to another police department and do the same thing and then move to another police department? It's like they just keep jumping around from here to here to here to here, and they just keep perpetuating their arrogance, really. So just some thoughts, and when it comes to there's no good cops in a racist system, I would say that it is inherently racist. The whole government is inherently racist, and the police departments are inherently racist because that's where culture is. It just is. So until we change our culture, it is always going to be a racist system that enforces racist policies and racist ideologies. And I could qualify that later.
Thanks, Carl. And I think, that speaks to the idea of just white supremacy that is pervasive in our institutions. And that's something that is part of the conversation right now, especially in recent weeks. And Senator Iwamoto, if you can, I guess if you have anything to add to the question.
I can get where you are, Carl, when you lose track of thoughts, but you've done really good on that. And I liked you bringing up the changing the culture, because when I've been working on these campus safety bills and looking at how the police, how sexual assault has been and some of the police officers or whatever, you have to change the culture and or there won't be change. And so that cultural change is really important. I think one thing that's really important that I've been working on, and I don't know if I'm going to have it ready for this session, but I've been working on that duty to intervene. And it's just when you see something going wrong that you intervene into it and stop what's going on. And it's that area, it seems pretty simple, but it's not. It impacts all kinds of different policy considerations. And that's why I've been struggling with getting something drafted that is good. But I just kind of go to just being, I don't know if I should say this publicly, but being on I've been on different boards, and I've been an attorney. And when people step up, I've seen examples of this from police officers to hospitals to whatever, but they've stepped up when there's a wrong. And that is so impactful. It leads to maybe litigation not being pursued, or just the right thing to do. And so when you've stepped up, it can help the victims so very much, and have you have confidence in the police. And I have specific examples of that. So that duty to intervene is really important. And it's not always easy, you know, when you have a supervisor that you're supposed to look up to and they're telling you, and you're maybe a rookie police officer. So that has a lot of facets to it, but that's all I'll say on that.
Thanks, Senator. And I think the next question too, I just want to be mindful of our time. We could probably get in one, maybe two questions before we close out this evening. But this idea of being able to stand up and speak out about issues that are going on within your department or agencies you work with or within. This next question kind of touches on that, with this idea of what are called Brady lists. So these are lists that are intended to keep track of police officers that have been dishonest, right? And this can be used as defense attorneys to show, like during trial, for example, that you know, this officer can't be trusted on their testimony based on this history. And so, and this is a specific question for Senator Iwamoto or Representative Hutchings. If you could address the lack of legislation requiring this type of disclosure, I guess, yeah, we could start with that. If you guys are aware of this issue. I think there's this was prompted by a recent, I think it was a Tribune article that came out, or sorry, KU TV News. Hutchings.
I can start with that. Is that okay, Senator? Do you mind?
Yes, you can.
You guys, when we're in the House, you always have to be very differential to the senators.
Oh yeah, right.
Always sit just a little bit lower. Part of it is, and one of the things that I get excited about, but is also very frustrating, is in a world where we can do a lot of things and share a lot of information, it's only been, you guys, just very recently that our criminal justice system left paper. And we haven't even completely left paper. The Board of Pardons and Parole right now is in the final stages of going digital. And so how do you track? How do you mark? How do you, there's a lot of things that are possible now that we just haven't gotten to. And so I wouldn't say that it's an area where the legislature would be opposed to something like that. But when the courts went digital, it used to be you needed a court record. You literally went in, paid a clerk to go down to the basement, roll through the file cabinets, grab the file, Xerox it, bring you a copy. Well, how do you share that statewide? And how do you use that for research? And how do you use that to inform legislation? You can't. And it was only, good grief, maybe a decade ago that the courts really went through that modernization process. This is why I'm excited. It's frustrating because we're not there, but I'm excited because we can now get there. The trick goes to one thing I said before, though, is it's such a massive universe that we need to make sure that we're focusing in on priorities and being very clear to accomplish step by step so we can move things forward and make sure that we're making progress that way. But I wouldn't say that it's not an area of interest. It's just an area we, quite frankly, I don't think have gotten to because we couldn't. It's like the good old days when people would go to Alaska because nobody knew who you were, nobody knew where you were from, nobody asked for identification. It was just nobody knew, nobody could track anybody, nobody had any idea. And that world's changing. And in a lot of ways, it's going to allow us massive amounts of transparency that we've never had before.
The only thing I'm going to add is that I think this information is so important. And I want to say that the media is I'm really happy that the media does this investigative work, because they have issues with the grandma and they have their things that are hard for them to get information, but without the media, I think a lot of these things wouldn't come to light. So I appreciate that. And but I think this database, and also to be able to share the information, not just throughout our state, but even when someone fed, so it's a database with precautions to privacy, but a database that we could find out if someone has gone to a different state. And that's something we were talking about with one of my bills too, to make sure that we get that information easily from other states as well.
Cool, thank you. And this will be the close of our discussion this evening. And this easily could be a graduate school seminar, just talking about the upcoming session for sure. So I think a lot of us will have our contact information available. So if you have any questions about these things, you can reach out and continue the discussion further. But just want to thank the panelists, definitely taking time in an evening right before almost the eve of the session. It's great to have this discussion here and present as we prep for the upcoming weeks. Again, kind of this like inside scoop of behind the scenes of how this stuff kind of works together and maybe sometimes doesn't work together. And importantly too, I want to thank the audience for participating and sticking it out until 8:30 on a Monday evening. And I'd like to thank our sponsors as well. The League of Women Voters, Salt Lake, Better Utah Institute, NAACP Salt Lake Branch, ACLU Utah, Utah Black Roundtable, and Journey of Hope. And I want to just remind everybody that you should mark your calendars for March 8th at 7 p.m. We are going to take a look at kind of like a legislative wrap up to conclude the series on coming together on police reform. So that's again on March 8th at 7 p.m. You should see some social media posts about that upcoming discussion on any of the sponsors' social media feeds soon. So again, thank you to the panelists and have a good evening.
Thank you.